Welcome to the Germinate Podcast, where agriculture, business, and innovation take root and thrive. I'm Joe Sampson, and with nearly 2 decades of experience in agricultural equipment and scaling businesses, I'm here to bring you actionable insights, inspiring stories, and strategic advice. Whether you're an industry veteran or just starting out, this podcast is your guide to cultivating ideas, expanding your knowledge, and growing your venture. So let's get started and germinate your path to success. All right, welcome back to the Germinate Podcast, everybody. Today I've got a guest on that I guess shows the power of LinkedIn. So Henry Gordon-Smith, thank you so much for joining us. How are you, man?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. I'm great. Everything's good. Thank you.
Yeah. You're in Spain right now. You just told us you're in Spain. What's up with that?
I am. I'm in Marbella, Spain right now. I think there's a mix of reasons. One reason is I'm a nomad. So it's been advantageous to me to travel the world for work. And, Europe is one place I spend about 3 to 4 months a year in. And I like to be based here. The second reason is that my family has a house here. And my father passed away a little over a year ago. So I try to spend more time with my mom here. So she just got here and we'll be spending the next month together here in Spain. And the third reason is that people may not know this, but the largest concentration of greenhouses in the world is in Spain. So not too far from here. Sometimes I take the car up and I visit different greenhouses in Almeria, Spain. And if you look at it, you can actually see it from space. So it's this huge area of greenhouses, produces the vast majority of fruits and vegetables undercover for Europe. Obviously, the Netherlands has a big concentration as well, but Spain, because of its climate, allows for certain crops and certain types of agriculture. So sort of 3 reasons why I'm here and happy to be here.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, let's dive in. Vertical farming, that's your area of expertise. So let's just start by telling everybody what that is and the real basics of vertical farming in your own words.
Yeah, so by definition, vertical farming is really about optimizing space and certain resources. So what you do is you essentially take a cultivation area, like imagine a field, and you stack it indoors. So you stack it on top of each other. Now, obviously, if I take the field and I put it indoors, there's going to be some changes I make. The first one being that I no longer have the sun. So what I'm going to do is on each layer of cultivation, I'm going to replace the sun with LED lights. And these LED lights have an optimized spectrum of various kinds where I can not only provide the light the plants need, but I can actually optimize that light to grow the plants faster, stronger, healthier. I can even adjust the nutrition of the plants just using light, which is obviously a primary factor for growth in the plants. Now, another thing I'm going to change is I'm going to remove soil from the system. And soil is great if it's healthy and nutritious, but often soil has been degraded. So obviously, if I'm putting this farm up and constructing it, I don't want any pests or contamination in my farm because it's an indoor clean environment. It's not exposed to the elements. So I need to make sure that I don't have something in there that's going to spread because it's like a hospital, right? You don't want anything that's infectious in there that's going to spread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it with what's called a hydroponic system. And hydroponic comes from the Greek words hydro, water, and ponic, work. So it means that the water is delivering the nutrients more than the soil is delivering the nutrients. Typically, plants live in the soil and they absorb macro, micronutrients. When irrigation happens, microbes work with the root zone to do that. Mm-hmm. But you can actually achieve that in a more precise way, just like the light example, with a hydroponic system. And there's various types of hydroponics, but it saves space in the farm, it reduces pathogens, and it actually allows you to reuse the water. So we'll recycle that water in a circulated system. So we're not losing water like you would outdoors. When you irrigate, it goes into the soil, I have to irrigate again, or wait for rain.
Sure.
In an indoor environment, I can control the amount of water. I'm also going to put my nutrients in that water and control the amount of nutrients my plants get. So I'm also almost hooking the plants up to an IV to give them exactly what they want when they want it. Now, because it's a controlled environment, which is the sort of technical term for greenhouses and vertical farms that leverage this technology to control light, temperature, everything, I'm going to, again, try to control as much as possible. So I'm going to have vents, I'm going to have dehumidifiers, I'm going to have fans, I'm going to have control systems, I'm going to have AI in many cases these days. So that's the technical background or technical definition of vertical farming. Now, there are many types of vertical farms, but the vast majority fit under the definition I have. just think about like a warehouse full of like 10 layers of this growing leafy greens. That's what a typical vertical farm would be like nowadays. But there are other types. You can have farms that are just sort of a couple layers. You can have farms that are smaller. There are some farms that are using soil mixes where they clean the soil. There are some farms that are growing different crops. There's some farms that are more automated or less automated, more high tech or low high tech. But in the principle, it's about controlling the environment completely. And unlike a greenhouse, we also remove sunlight. So greenhouses can be controlled as well, remove sunlight. I can give a bit of a history lesson about vertical farming just briefly, if that's helpful.
Yeah, fire away. I love it.
Why this even came about.
Yeah.
So, vertical farming has an interesting history. I think, the earliest example would be the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
Okay.
And the myth of, King Nebuchadnezzar and his wife who came from a green area and moved to the desert. And she was very disappointed about the desert and missed her green pastures that she grew up in. This is how the myth or the story goes.
We're like going way back. I love it.
We're going way back.
Let's
Don't
go.
worry, I'll speed up a little bit. Yeah.
No, I love it. Yeah.
But this is important because I think it also reflects the reason why it's back again, in a lot of ways, because there was always, when he built this hydroponic, it was a hydroponically powered tower of agriculture and gardens.
Sure.
He was trying to green the desert, right? Trying to green an area that had limited water and had certain challenges. So the engineering inventions were related to it. And the goals of it were not only just to respond to the demands of his wife, but also to green the desert and do something that wasn't possible in the desert. And I think also to do it in the city, right? So this was a farm that would maximize space in the city. So fast forward a little bit more, there were some vertical farms in the world fairs, like greenhouses that were tall, had vertical farms, a couple of world fairs. There was one in the I believe the late 40s in Vienna. There was a couple others that moved into the 50s and 60s. Then it sort of went away for a while. And then NASA started exploring vertical farming again when they were thinking about growing food in space. In space, it's very heavy and expensive to take heavy materials like food and water and soil into space for the astronauts. So they started looking at hydroponics and stacking levels of cultivation for astronauts to not only get food, but to also generate some oxygen from the plants and recycle water.
Mm-hmm.
So these were the earliest ones, and they were growing potatoes. They were growing all kinds of crops in early NASA research. Also in the late 80s, Japan, as an island state where the population had grown so much and it was economically quite strong, started making restrictions on the amount of land that could be converted from forest into farming. They needed to protect their forests. So what they did is they said, no more new arable land. So suddenly the space and the value of farmland went up. And people started saying, well, there's certain crops like lettuces that we can grow in greenhouses or in what they called plant factories, which is the Japanese term for a vertical farm. So commercial vertical farms really started in the late 80s, 90s in Japan as a response to overpopulation and lack of land, and thus the verticality of it, thus the maximum of the space. Now, they had various technologies that they invented related to that. Their lights got optimized. The original lights weren't very efficient. They weren't LED lights. So there was a lot of evolution that happened. It didn't really grow elsewhere in the world, really until, I reported on I started as a blogger, right? So out of college, I got interested in this topic and I started blogging about urban agriculture, growing food in cities, and new technologies like vertical farming for this. That was the name Agritecture, was sort of bringing architectural thinking to farming, which is what's necessary in the city.
Sure.
So anyway, in about 2011, I featured the first vertical farm that was announced in North America as a commercial vertical farm called Local Garden. And in 2010, there was a book authored by Dr. Dixon Depommier called The Vertical Farm. He was my mentor at Columbia University a few years later. So anyway, this sort of initiated this internet phenomenon of interest in vertical farming, and these light bulbs started going off in these entrepreneurs' minds, and they started building these farms. And in North America and Europe, they started to sprout up, and I started reporting on them. Now, that farm had a lot of flaws, and I reported on it, and I talked about the things that were good about it and the things that were wrong about it. And 1 year later, it went bankrupt, and the equipment was for sale on Craigslist. So I earned a reputation as being someone who was very honest about the sector. I was sort of presenting a vision of the future of how it would work, but very honest about the practicalities of it. Now, we're getting close to the present. Vertical farming exploded after that. It started being built all around the world, especially in Europe and North America. A lot of funding started going in from Silicon Valley, starting around 2018 up until 2023. a lot of funding. We're talking about maybe $4 billion that went into this. And around 2021, I noticed that these farms were hyping themselves up. They were saying that they could grow things that they couldn't. There are certain limitations when you replace the sun to what you can grow economically, not technically, but economically. So I was very concerned. I started writing about this, and I tried to find an objective lens, and I applied the Gartner hype cycle, if your audience is familiar with that, of technology evolution, sort of hype and then a trough of disillusionment when it doesn't deliver that hype, and then sort of a slope of enlightenment. That happened with solar, it happened with electric cars, it happened with many technologies. So I applied it objectively to this sector, and I said, look, we're in trouble because the hype is too high, and we're going to start entering the trough of disillusionment, and we did. And so I think $3 billion have been lost since then in bankruptcies. The biggest vertical farms in North America and Europe have all gone bankrupt for various reasons that we can get into. And now we're sort of entering this slope of enlightenment where the farms are still being built, but there's these veterans from the industry, and technology has advanced and made it more affordable. And retailers and consumers are now aware of it. I mean, 10 years ago, nobody knew what a vertical farm was. Now people know about it. And so we're entering a new era where this is really finding its fit in the food system in a realistic way. And Agritecture moved from a blog, which started in 2011, into a consultancy in 2014. And we've been consulting on these farms and some other types of farms for more than a decade now.
Man, that's a plethora of knowledge.
Sorry,
insane. I mean, clearly this is something that you're super interested in, and you know a lot about.
I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is too. It's fascinating. I remember when we first had our first conversation. Now, my audience is typically your typical farmer, your corn, soybean, wheat, middle America, Midwest farmer. And so they're looking at this and they're hearing this conversation. They're going, this is not something that I can even get my hands wrapped around. Vertical farming's done in Asia or maybe New York City where you live. Yeah. But clearly it's an old school practice, but I look at it like the kind of the AI of farming today. You can do everything, kind of faster, 10x the speed. You can mimic the sun. You don't need soil. You named it through your opening there. So talk about what it is today that makes it so vital and so important, and maybe an outlet for the typical grower to diversify into.
Now, listen, despite the challenges in vertical farming and despite the reasonable skepticism from many actors, including the farmers that you're talking about, the audience that we should respect because they have the most experience and the most understanding of this, I am long on vertical farming, but I'm also conservative about how its role is going to be. For example, these farms that were hyping themselves up, they wanted the investors to believe that they were going to be the biggest farming companies in the world, right? So they said, this is the future of agriculture, which it's not. It's not the future of agriculture. It is a part of the future of agriculture. And we need to be very honest about what part it is and what part it isn't. So I'll try to explain this and why I'm long on it in different ways. One reason is that by 2050, 80% of our food is going to be consumed in cities. So, we have moved all of our agriculture outside of cities, which is where it actually used to be nearby, to other places that we import it from. Now, cities themselves have certain requirements and needs for resiliency purposes. And I think there's more cities believing that we should have some agriculture as part of our city to create green jobs and to create resilience. So that's one of the drivers. Also, cities themselves have populations that are buying most of the food or paying the most money for the food, right? So, these populations care more than they did before about where their food comes from. Organic obviously grew over the last 30, 40 years as a desirable brand that people wanted to buy for themselves and their families. But now you're getting organic product from China. So city dwellers are saying, maybe organic doesn't give me what I want. And actually local, if you look at the data for consumption, local is becoming more popular and starting to compete. People want to know where the farm is, where it's from, and they're starting to be a little bit more conscious about that. So products that are labeled as local do that. Now, vertical farming can be local. The food can come within a day or less, which increases the shelf life of the product, reduces the carbon footprint of the food miles, and has sort of that benefit for those consumers. You also have threats to our supply chain. You have climate change, which is affecting production at the farm level for certain crops, many crops. I just finished teaching one semester at Columbia University, of course, on climate smart agriculture globally. We look at every continent, and we're talking about trillions of dollars lost at an annual level from crop losses due to hurricanes that weren't there, changes in climate, droughts, pest changes, something that farmers are going to be very aware of. And at the global scale, this is affecting the supply and the affordability of produce. So retailers are saying, you know what, we actually want to have more control over our supply, and we want to have more security over our supply so that our consumers continue to come to our store knowing that those produce products are going to be there. And consumers, again, have demanded the same products year round, right? And farmers know that too. They're asking a lot of farmers, right? Mm-hmm. So these products are coming from all around the world so that when you go to the supermarket, you have strawberries at a similar price no matter what time of year it is. And that's very difficult to deliver in a face of climate insecurity. We also have another driver, which is labor conditions. Farmers will know very well that acquiring labor and keeping labor is very, very challenging. We've got issues in the United States related to immigration and labor. We've got issues related to young people not getting involved in agriculture. Now, when you technify agriculture and you bring it closer to the cities, you can reduce the amount of labor per output through automation and technology, and you can increase the sexiness of agriculture for these farmers, because now it's no longer just a typical farming job, but I could have a job where my job is actually managing an entire farm and managing the robots and the systems in it versus doing the labor of planting and transplanting and harvesting and packing. Now, those roles still exist, but these farms are getting more and more automated. And as very technified farms, these vertical farms embrace that. Now, there's a lot of other aspects that are happening. You could think about water scarcity. These farms save a lot of water. You could think about consumer demand for pesticide-free. These farms do not use any pesticides because they're enclosed environments. So there's a lot of drivers. However, at Agritecture, we talk about the fact that you don't just need a lot of drivers. You need the right drivers combined with the conditions for the farm to be viable. So, for example, you may save water with a vertical farm in the northeast of the US, but water is not expensive in the Northeast, and nor is it scarce. So when I see vertical farms promoting we save less water, it's like, yeah, that's great, but the business case for that doesn't really make sense. What does make sense is that they can deliver it locally, right? Because it's mostly coming from California and Arizona. Now, I want to state the fact that vertical farms, because of the light, you can't grow everything economically. I said that, right? So what you typically can grow now is leafy greens. So because you can only grow leafy greens, it doesn't make sense to put these farms everywhere, because there's certain regions that can grow them effectively or can grow other crops, or it doesn't make sense. There's not a demand or need for it. But let's look at Canada. Canada depends on most of its leafy greens being imported. Now, you can grow those leafy greens in greenhouses, but that can be challenging during certain times of the year because of the Canadian climate. If you put it in a vertical farm, you can grow it consistently and you can offset those imports. So there's certain markets which have certain drivers. The Middle East, where I work a lot, there's no water and there's no arable land. So your ability to grow outdoors is pretty much zero. They import 85% of all their food. So there's a need to sort of not just produce in the short term, leafy greens, herbs, things like this, specialty products and vertical farms, but in the long term to stimulate a local economy around agriculture and technology, to get young people involved in it, to get investors involved in it, to get policies mature for it. So depending on where you are, you could have these drivers. Now, I want to give one more example because it's not as easy as just saying there's no water, there's no land, so vertical farming will work. Even there's low-cost energy in this region, which helps a lot. But let's go to the Bahamas. The Bahamas contacted us and they said, we import all our food. We don't have any land. We're a small place. We have tourists that come that demand quality product. We need a vertical farm. And I already said to them on the call, I said, look, it's not viable because your energy rates are so high. They pay 35 cents a kilowatt hour, I think last time I checked. So these farms demand a lot of energy. That's one of the main downsides is they're high in CapEx and they demand a lot of energy. So these are the main business risks is that if you don't solve that with the right conditions. So they said, okay, show me the numbers. So they paid us and we did a little feasibility study for them. And it wasn't viable. It was going to take more than 10 years to get the vertical farm to pay itself back. And not to mention all the possible challenges that could happen with a new farm. So, even if you have conditions like hurricanes and no land and imports, it's sometimes not enough. You need a variety of conditions. And that means it limits the market size for vertical farming, which is why I was concerned about the other companies promoting it too big, because at the end, you have to actually deliver the economic value. So that's where design comes in. That's where our work comes in, right? We do the market research. We look at the conditions, we look at the climate, we look at the labor conditions, we look at the energy, et cetera. And we design what makes most sense. And sometimes a vertical farm doesn't make sense and a greenhouse makes sense. Sometimes a greenhouse doesn't make sense and a field farm that uses smart irrigation and IoT sensors makes sense.
Sure.
So this is the sort of the journey and like why I'm still long on it, because the conditions that are making vertical farming interesting are getting worse. The demand for local is going to go up. Population in the cities is going to continue to rise until 2050. Climate change continue to affect supply chains. People are continuing moving to cities and outside of farming. So vertical farming has a place in our food system, but we need to be very honest about what that place is and as specific as possible.
Yeah. What kind of came up when you were talking to me there was a couple of points. One is we're battling government tariffs and uncertainty and all these crazy conditions right now. And all we keep saying to ourselves is that the pro side of that argument is, we'll be able to build something in the United States. And obviously that's a really good thing. Everybody wants that.
That's a nice idea.
It's a great idea. The problem with that idea is it's really hard to just start a factory, start making something. We're not going to be able to make iPhones tomorrow. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we're changing all these conditions. But the reality of it is the main message of that is let's make something in the U.S. and then or bring that down to our own states. I live in Iowa. You live in New York. Let's make something in New York. Let's make something in Iowa. Or tone it down a little bit more. I want to have my own garden in my backyard. And how fulfilling is it? I know it is for me. We put a garden in every year in my backyard and we grow all sorts of different stuff. And it's the best feeling. I'm out mowing my yard. I reach in my garden, grab whatever it is, take a bite. It's so fulfilling. I love it. It's great. And farmers markets are super popular everywhere in the country, probably everywhere in the world. So all of this makes a heck of a lot of sense. I think the problems that you're running into, and you kind of alluded on them, is number one, it's very expensive to do this. And number two, you need a lot of energy to do this. So they're not sustainable everywhere you go. Why is it so expensive? And why do you need so much energy?
So when we go back to the technology itself, right, I either have to retrofit an existing building, which has certain costs to it. Sometimes there's tax opportunities in that, but I have to find the right building. I have to retrofit that. I have to install massive amounts of plastic because of the hydroponic systems, irrigation systems, metal structures for the racks. I have to install lights. The lights are extremely expensive. I mean, the lights alone could be 30 to 40% of the CapEx sometimes. They're very sophisticated, expensive lights, and you need thousands of them in these big farms. In addition to those lights, I have to create a climate control system that allows every crop to grow consistently. Because the one thing is consistency, right? If I'm a big vertical farm, which is what we're talking about right now, sort of the bigger ones, imagine
what do you mean by bigger? Just give us an idea.
A big vertical farm would be like 50,000 or 200,000 square feet of area bed space. So it might be in a building that's a 200,000 square foot building, right? I went to the largest vertical farm in North America, which is just next to Cincinnati Airport in Kentucky. And it's 200,000 square feet of bed space. It's 3 different growth chambers. And in between each growth chamber are massive tanks for irrigation, fertilizer. The infrastructure is really incredible. And these chambers are completely controlled and automated. So I've got robotics as well that are moving the trays out to the harvest area. I've got really expensive packaging systems to be able to harvest. I mean, you're harvesting very fast, right? So unlike corn or soy, I'm harvesting pretty much 3 days a week, at least.
Right.
The crop, sometimes 20% of my farm is going to be harvested every week. So, because these crops take 30 days to grow, right? In some cases. So there's a lot of equipment. Now I've also got sensors, AI, various technologies. I've got all the input costs that typically exist with farms, fertilizers, seeds, and then I've got my labor costs. So, but anyway, from CapEx perspective, they're just very high tech and very intensive. And the climate systems are both expensive on the CapEx and the OpEx side. So, these facilities, that facility probably was $50 million,
Sure.
Just to give you an idea about that. But, some of these facilities are providing, it may sound small to the farmers you're talking about, but they're providing consumers, this isn't this specific facility, but they're providing maybe produce to 20,000 families a day. You know what I mean? Like in the city, right? And it's all delivered within less than a day. And because the product is so fresh, its shelf life is longer than any of the product that's imported. Its nutrition is higher and it's pesticide free. So it's a premium product that's being delivered to families in America as a result of this. That's why the CapEx is hard. And the energy demand from those lights and that climate system is kind of equivalent to a data center. And as you think about how expensive data centers are, the infrastructure you need even to get the power to the building is expensive. So, they're really serious operations, especially the big ones. Now, you can build smaller ones. There's some, just to let people know, we can even talk about a rural farming example in a moment, but there's a lot of small distributed vertical farms that are focused on restaurants that just grow specialty edible flowers and things that are imported and allow the chefs to engage with the farm to get that. And those farms are very profitable. They can make payback in 2 years, 3 years, because they're much smaller. They don't have to require as many big infrastructure moves, and they're selling their product at high margins because of the experience that they give to the chefs. But that's not impacting food security in a major way, but it is an interesting dynamic, and just to give you a different profile of the farms. But I do want to talk about the farm example in California for your audience in a moment when you're ready.
Yeah. Well, talk about the size of, you talk, 200,000 square foot in Kentucky. What's a small footprint?
So we've worked on projects for clients like Farm One, and Farm One started with a 500 square foot, room.
Okay.
That they built the first vertical farm in, and we found with them the Institute for Culinary Education near Battery Park in New York City. So this is an Institute for Culinary Education where they made a deal where give us the space for free. We'll put a farm in here and we'll teach the students a little bit about this product and we'll sell the product to chefs. So it was the ideal pilot for our client. Then our client expanded to the basement in Tribeca of a Michelin star restaurant. They made a deal there. We give a percentage of the product to the restaurant for our rent, and the rest we sell to other high-end restaurants. They ended up getting in total 11 Michelin stars in combination of their customers. Now they've expanded, and now they're in Brooklyn in a much larger space, probably about 4,000 square feet is the grow area, but then it also has an event space and other things related to the brewery in it. So these are new models for not just producing food, but also food experiences in the city that could be leveraged by developers, and there's other groups looking at it to sort of re-stimulate communities or mini malls or strip malls that are out of business. So there's a lot of models in basements and unused spaces across cities, across America and the world now. Entrepreneurs are learning how to build these farms, whether it's with us or without us, and going for it and creating almost like these small family farms in cities, which are really interesting. They're really interesting. And with enough of them, it starts to make an interesting dent, but they certainly do provide other benefits to the cities as well.
It sounds to me like you think that's the more sustainable plan, that route, versus let's build something that's 200,000 square feet. It's just, it seems very, very, that's very, very niche. There might be some of those out there, but I don't know, maybe I'm reading into this wrong, but it seems to me like that's where you see the vision of vertical farming going. Is that accurate?
I think we're interesting at Agritecture because I'm kind of right-brained, and my team members are all left-brained, right? They're all engineers and agronomists and very
What do you mean by
practical.
right and left brain?
Well, right-brained people are a little bit more on the creative side, a little bit more risky, a little bit more like anything is possible kind of attitude.
And that's you.
That's me. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
I think as a young kid, I've always been that way. I'm always designing things that are out of this world. And
Right.
I've always just sort of been that way. I mean, my parents also gave me a lot of opportunities that made me feel like there's anything I could do and anywhere I could do it.
Right.
So I'm grateful for that. But, when you go into education as an engineer or as a farmer with your experience teaches you something different, right? And also your personality. And I think my colleagues who are amazing are more left brain, which is they're more about logic, numbers, practicality, risk reduction.
Yeah.
So in our company, we try to balance those things. We call ourselves creative but conservative, a little bit like right brain, left brain.
Yep.
And our process for working embraces both of those. But I think as I've learned, it's much better to be creative on the marketing and the business model than it is to be creative on the technical and operational side, right? So these farms that are focused on being creative as far as where they are and who their customers are and the products they're growing, and the way they market them and how they do tours or connect with the public or do social media. These are areas that are very smart areas to take risks because they connect with that urban dweller that's willing to pay more for an experience or for a quality product, right? That we discussed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
However, what you don't want is a system that's too automated, like the first farm I mentioned that went bankrupt. Too many rotating systems, too complex, too expensive. You don't want to build tech for the sake of tech, right? And so you want to be conservative about that so that the farmers can run it effectively, so it can deliver results. So yes, I think that those farms balance those things very effectively. I think that because their budgets are smaller, they tend to not over-engineer their farms, and they're very thrifty, like a typical farmer would be. They're not going to buy a robot. They're going to actually try and build their own robot. I was at one in Montreal, and they needed to clean the systems, and there was a very expensive robot on the market to clean them. And instead they said, let's get some college students and let's just make one. And they just did like a hackathon and made their robot, and then they did another version, and now they're on version 3 that cleans their systems. I forgot the name of it, Bertha or something. I don't know what they named the robot, but that's so cool.
Yeah,
like
it is.
That more reflects the farmer personality of like, why am I going to spend something? I'm spending on something if I can try and do it myself. I'm only going to, buy those things that are absolutely necessary, and I'm going to try and have as much internal knowledge and skills and simplify as much as possible. And so that's why I think that there's a combination of direct access to the highest consumers, right? The highest paying consumers and products for them, and lower cost of production because you're not building a mega facility. And because you're not building a mega facility, you can actually raise money from friends and family, which means your investment is coming from let's say a more calm source than a Silicon Valley VC investor that's going to be on your back expecting you to invent robots and push the boundaries and be on the cover of Forbes magazine, right? These farms are practical and they're creative, but they're also practical.
Yeah.
So I think that's why those big farms, one reason why those big farms didn't succeed is because they started reinventing technologies that already existed, or technologies that they could have solved through even just operational excellence in some cases. And they increased the risk by spending so much money on so much scale. Now, one more point is you want to sell out of your farm, right? You don't want waste. The smaller my farm, the more likely I am to sell out of it, right? If you're a salesperson and you've got to make contracts with Kroger's and Walmart, that's interesting for some people, but that's a really hard business. Those retailers always have the power over you, right? They're always the bigger player. But if you're a unique farm growing something that nobody else is growing in a market, in a restaurant, has customers that expect that product to be high quality, and they're paying for it, you sort of have a more equal balanced relationship between the farm and the restaurateur, and you can sell out of your product more easily. And let's say you're not selling out, you can have a farmer's stand right in front of your farm and do it.
Yeah.
Right. But a big farm could never sell the millions of pounds they produce. They have to get these contracts to get the offtake agreements, et cetera. So it helps you understand some of those differences. And that's why choosing the right size, whether it's small or let's say somewhere in between, a medium one or large, as well as choosing the right type of farm is very critical to this exercise.
Oh, yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think you just kind of spoke to the American farmer, maybe without realizing it. It's because the American farmer is very, they still use their brains in a strange way. What happens sometimes in today's world is, you know what I mean? I'm going to get to a point, I promise. But we kind of over-process everything in today's America, or really in today's world. There's a strategy for this and a process for that.
Right.
All those are good things.
AI for this.
Yes, yeah. We know that you can't do a lot of things without a process. But the problem is sometimes we over-process everything and nothing ever gets done. To your example and to your point there about, the piece of equipment that need to be washed, and they just figured out and said, hey, let's go hire some college kids and get this thing washed. Yeah. It's simple stuff. And farmers do that today all the time. And almost every great farm innovation that's ever been brought to market has been because a farmer thought about, hey, I need to do this in my field, and there isn't this out there. I'm going to make it myself. And they do it. Exactly. They make a prototype. The next thing you know, they're Great Plains or they're Landau or one of these huge giant manufacturers. And similar concept to this is just finding the right niche, finding the right size, finding the right market, to kind of promote it and see where it goes. And I think this leads into the example of the California farm that we talked about before, when you're saying there's actual farmers out here putting vertical farms on their land. You've seen it with your own eyes.
Well, that's what's interesting. Like I said, I've been doing this since 2011. So like, there's been a lot of interesting chapters in the technology, its advancement, and in everything related to it, the public awareness of it, the way cities engage with it, the way entrepreneurs get. It's been so exciting because it's changing so
Yeah.
rapidly. But one of the things that's happening now is there's sort of this hybridization that's occurring. Like we used to think of these farms as replacements to other types of farms, right? Like, so instead of growing the lettuce in California, I'm going to grow it in New York. And that was the typical thinking. But now it's like we can actually combine these farms with other types of agriculture to use the right technology as opposed to just throwing high tech at everything. And let me explain this. I was doing a workshop in Fresno, of all places, about vertical farming that I was invited to do. And when it was announced, I got contacted by a farmer who said, "Hey, I actually have a vertical farm in Fresno. Do you want to come see it?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds crazy." And I had never been to this part of California, to be honest. And I'm driving with my rental car and there's, cattle everywhere. And then I'm driving through like fields of citrus to get to this guy.
Dude, it's farm country. Yeah.
It's farm country. There's a lot of space and there's a lot of growing and, there's not a lot of tech, right? You don't see it, at least, right? So it's just farming, just land and farming. And so I get to like whatever part of his farm and farmers will know this, but there was this old like wash station, like one of those buildings where they wash the produce in it. He was growing citrus. So, just these machines, and I don't see any vertical farm, but he's like, "Here's my vertical farm." And he opens up the doors and he converted this unused building on his property into a vertical farm in a very thrifty way. He just bought hydroponic channels off Craigslist. He would built it incrementally. And it was probably like 2,000 square feet. It wasn't that big as far as the area where the farm was. It wasn't that controlled. Like he had some fans and things like that, but it wasn't like what you would see in a sophisticated vertical farm. But the guy knew how to grow. He was a farmer, right? So he knew how to grow quality product.
Sure.
And he knew technology, he knew how to hack things. So he had built a pretty impressive system and he was growing leafy greens and herbs on there. And I said, why did you do this? And how did you make these choices?
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, I had an unused building. I heard about the tech. I started looking on Reddit and Craigslist and, I just built my own and I designed it to be big enough that I can manage it entirely on my own, right? So it's almost like a hobby farm for him, which sounds crazy because he's already a farmer.
Sure.
But again, as you know, citrus isn't something that you're dealing with the same way all year round. You're certainly not harvesting. You don't have workers around all the time year round, only during certain times of the year. So the rest of the year, he does have a bit of time on his hand and time is a resource. So he said, I had some time, so I thought I would build it for fun. And actually I sell it every weekend at the farmer's market. And so now he's getting cash, like he's getting straight up cash for something he's growing that he built on his own, that he seems to enjoy and he can manage on his own. And it's extra cash in between the seasons where he gets his typical payments. And so I think that's an idea of complementing, right? You have a farm asset, you've got skills. These systems are almost democratized at this point, right? You can get instructions online how to build them. You can see pictures of the farms.
Yeah.
If you want it enough, you can build it. You can advance it. You can invent things for it. You can customize it to your own needs. It's kind of an open source tech to some extent. And that's what he did, and I think that's really inspiring and interesting. And it was totally his idea, right? It wasn't like, maybe you heard about it in some news, but it wasn't like me trying to convince a farmer to do this. This was a farmer coming up with their own idea to build their own vertical farm. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I love that.
Greenhouses, which exist a lot, vertical farms are great for seedling production, for greenhouses and outdoor agriculture. Many farmers might not know this, but in a controlled environment, you can grow healthier plants. So, for example, if you're a strawberry farmer in Canada, there's so much disease in the strawberries now. So most strawberry farmers have gone out of business. And if you could have a vertical farm, and there certainly are some being planned where you grow the seedlings and grow your own young plants, you can have your farm plants on your strawberry farm, a field strawberry farm, be healthier, increasing your likelihood of success and your investment. And you can sell the extra seeds to other farmers as seedlings for them to be better. So there's new businesses growing around the supply chain for seedlings using vertical farms, either directly next to greenhouses or to supply field farms. It's actually been done for potatoes for a long time that people didn't know about in controlled environments. Potato seedlings are also grown in greenhouses and controlled systems. And there's a lot more types of crops that are now getting involved in this besides the typical leafy greens, because at the seedling level, you can grow a lot of things feasibly. It's being used for forestry. It's being used to grow young mangrove trees in the UAE. So it's really interesting to see how the technology evolves. And I think that's what we should get excited about is that there are young people and older people in cities that don't have farming experience that are now engaging in agriculture and trying it, and that there's new technologies developing from that work that can benefit existing farmers and help them make more money for their assets.
I mean, 100%. And I think it's one of those things that if you don't know anything about it, dive into it. Definitely look at your company because you talk, I mean, clearly you're highly expert at this thing. And it's one of those things that, everybody needs to kind of understand what the possibilities are today, but what they can be in the future. And I look at it sort of nutritionally as well. We're kind of in this movement, whether you like it or not, the MAHA movement. My wife has an autoimmune disease. So she's always been kind of a freak about her diet, which therefore so am I, because we've been married for almost 20 years. Yeah. So I can't eat, we don't eat Big Macs and French fries anymore because autoimmune diseases and what you eat are a major part of it. I don't know if people know that, but that's just the way it works. So she's tried everything under the sun. And what I've noticed lately is, I mean, this is just maybe a silly example, but we grew strawberries in our backyard last year. And they were like the size of maybe a little bit bigger than a quarter, but they were unbelievably good, like really good, super flavorful. You go to the grocery store and the strawberry is the size of an apple and they taste like nothing. They can't be nutritious. They're sprayed with all sorts of things. And I think we're all starting to realize now that what we put into our systems matters. Yes. And you can't just feed yourself junk and expect to feel good. That's not the way it works. So talk about the nutritional aspect of this. And I was intrigued by no pesticides, none of these things. I know the American farmer might think of this portion of the podcast like, oh, this is BS, but I think clearly we're starting to understand that there's a lot of things that we're eating that we probably shouldn't be, including a lot of hidden things like pesticides, maybe plastics, maybe all these other things that nobody even knows about. So I don't know. Talk about that. I'm sure you've done some research on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think nutrition actually and nutrition science is still like one of these really evolving segments of academia and research. So I'll share what I know now. There's one person I work with called Alina Zolotareva, and she's a dietitian and she's worked at a number of vertical farms and she focuses on this if anybody wants to go deeper. But look, I think for me, that the research I've looked at, one of the main drivers for nutrition in, say, perishable products like strawberries, leafy greens, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, is how old it is. Like, when was it harvested? Mm-hmm. And I think when you're importing products from around the world, you have to not only accept the data that there's significant nutritional losses. I think the other day I was presenting at actually Columbia Health School to their master's program about this topic. And I had shared some academic research. There was 73% loss in most of the vitamins in spinach that was sent. So it's like, you're going to the store, you're buying spinach, you're trying to give something healthy to your family and your kids, and it's 73% less nutritious than if you grew it in your garden or if it was grown from a local farm.
Just due to time, just due to the age of it. That's
just due to the transportation. Once you think about it, the plant is attached to its nutrition source, the root. When you harvest it, it's cut off, it's dying.
Yeah.
So if it's dying for 5 days of transportation and then it's sitting on the shelf in the supermarket for 2 days, and then it's in let's be realistic, when you buy it, you don't eat it right away. You put it in your fridge. So we're talking about products that are 7 days old. Like, there should be no surprise that product is not going to give you a lot of flavor, which is a signal for nutrition, or nutrition, right? So both of those things are affected by that. So when I think about these farms, I think this is exciting that we can solve the major issue with nutrition because we can actually deliver it closer. Now, a secondary issue is, what are the nutrients in the soil, the macro micronutrients? And if we overuse the soil, we know that we're going to lose those nutrients and we're not going to be able to deliver the nutritional quality for everything else we invested into that product that we're growing on our farm, whatever that crop is. So that's why we take care of the soil, or we add so many amendments to maintain that nutrition. Now, in a hydroponic vertical farm, I'm removing that factor. Mm-hmm. And I'm controlling the nutrition I deliver to the product, And I'm able to actually test that product as well as you can test any food product for nutrition. So you're not only reducing the main factor that is cause of decline in nutrition in these perishable products, but you're also increasing the nutrition by delivering nutrients to the plant exactly when it needs it. It's not dependent upon the weather. It's not dependent on what the soil conditions are. It's also not such a big field where it could be better in some places or worse in the other, because I've got sensors that are telling me what the pH and the EC is throughout my farm that's being captured to data. And I can now even leverage other data analysis tools or AI tools to look at that and to alert me to optimize. So without genetically modifying the plants, we're growing them faster. We can grow them for better flavor. We can grow them with more nutrition. And then, but due to the supply chain benefit, we can improve that nutrition. Now, again, this may sound like, well, why aren't we doing this everywhere? I already answered that question, right? You need a lot of drivers to make that CapEx make sense, but those will shift more over the coming years. And I think the idea of growing food locally is nice, but consumers want that strawberry in the winter. So you're going to need technology to take that bridge to say, we can grow this year round. And that's where greenhouses that are high tech and year round and vertical farms that are high tech and year round can produce all of those fruits and vegetables I talked about: cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, strawberries, blueberries. In Canada now, I visited Canada. They're growing blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries in these farms, trying to get them year round. So this is something that is happening, and it's happening for good reason.
Yeah, and it's the salad bowl crops is what we call them. The California crops. Yeah, man, I think so spot on. Before we get on, I want to kind of close the vertical farming stuff on this. And fascinating, I could talk about this for hours. And by the way, if you're a farmer, there's an example of a guy in Fresno, California, that turned his wash building into a vertical farm by using his intuition, his brain, his thought. Probably went on YouTube like we all do now and figured it out. And now he's feeding his family with a super healthy crop, or maybe he's actually selling them into a farmer's market, making some cash off
it. I'm sure he eats some of it too.
I'm sure he eats it too. So you get a little diversification of cash coming in. We all know farming can be a very up and down business. So there's some ideas right there for you. Change an old building you have, convert it over, start growing whatever crop you want. You don't have to grow corn, soybeans, wheat. You can grow blueberries, raspberries, tomatoes, peppers, whatever the case may be, any time of year. So there's an example. Talk about real quick. You said this a long time ago.
Let me just say one thing on that, because I am conscious of your audience and their skepticism, and I'm glad you're encouraging them to at least consider it. And again, I'm not recommending you even hire us or do some big farm. I'm just look at it, just consider it, consider the economic benefit of it. You all know plumbing, you all know electrical, you know how to do these things better than I do as a city slicker, right? So you have different skills to do this, and you know your community and whether you can sell product at the farmers market, et cetera, and you come up with your own model. But we have some tools that will help you at least understand the basics. We have a farm planning software so that people don't actually hire us as consultants if they're building something small, for example. It's called Agritecture Designer. I'm just going to promote it because I'm going to give it to you for free. It's design.agritecture.com. It's got online classes to learn how controlled environment agriculture, greenhouses, and vertical farms work. The business models, the crops, the technologies, operations, everything related to it, a jumpstart course. It's got a market research tool where you can put in the prices that you think you can sell the product for, and then you can model your greenhouse or vertical farm online and get the economics. Now, it's typically for something that you would spend maybe $200,000 to $2 million on, maybe $5 million on. So there's a wide range in there. You might be building something smaller, but it's going to give you so much knowledge to do that. And if you use the promo code Plan Your Farm, you get it for free for 3 months. So, this is our way of saying, like, just look at it, just consider it. Like, it's not even, it's something worth looking at and investigating for yourself and just learning. It's just a fun thing to look at it over the weekend. If you have kids, you can build it with them. It's a really fun activity as well. So there you go.
Yeah, I love the plug. And of course, I'll put all that stuff in the show notes as well. Let's sort of transition a little bit out of this, because one other thing, the reason I found you, I told you this earlier right before we started, was I'm a chat GPT or whatever AI you use, and I plugged in, just popular people in agriculture, and your name came up. You have done a fantastic job of building your brand. And I think in fact, you told me this phrase, you probably don't remember this, but you
Yeah.
told me this in our first conversation. You said, well, if you don't build a brand for yourself, someone is going to do it for you. Do you remember telling me that?
Yeah, I remember that because that's really like what I want people to understand. And that's the incentive that I had for this and why I started experimenting with brand management on my own. And honestly, that phrase came from my mom. She's like, if you're not branding yourself, someone else is branding you. And the fact is, if you had searched and there was nothing there, or if somebody else had written something about me that I had no influence on, then that's it. That's my brand.
That's your
right?
brand. That's who you are. Yeah.
Your brand is whatever people find out there for you. So why not take control of it? Why not invest in it? It doesn't make any sense not to do it. It's even in a simple, minimal way. So yeah, I think my mom taught me that a long time ago. She's a good consultant. She was a good consultant. She's retired now. And I learned that from her. I owe credit to her for the original idea and the phrase.
Well, don't stop at that. You told me a little bit about your mom and her story, and I think it's super fascinating. So talk about what she did and what she taught you. And she wrote a book, right?
Yeah. So
it's not in English though.
It's not in English. Yeah,
that's the problem.
I have to ask her. I still need to get you like a manuscript. I think she has it in English somewhere. I have to ask. I'll work on that one.
Yeah, do it.
So my mom is from Czechoslovakia originally, right? And so she escaped when the Russians invaded. She went to England. She traveled the world with my father, who's a civil engineer and British, and they had an amazing life. When communism ended, my mom suddenly wanted to return to her country. And so she started thinking about what she could do to get involved in her country's redevelopment and go back there. And so she studied HR management. She said, I want to do something with people. That's fine. But then she realized that HR wasn't really like that valued in a lot of ways. It was sort of this like extra, like that the companies have. But it was starting to get more interest, starting to get into the C-suite, things like that.
Sure.
So she found an edge, and that's what business is always about, like an edge, a niche.
Yeah.
Where it's like, why are people so important, right? And you hear the phrases I have, the sort of terms I have a lot. She was very good at that, right? Like, she would say things like, a company, doesn't matter its technology or its products, is nothing without its people. And it's so logical, right? But when you think about that phrase as a branded leadership statement, it's so clear to people and it makes sense and helps people identify what she's about and what she's going to help you do. So she built a bit of her career in Southeast Asia where we were living, and then she moved back to the Czech Republic with me. And she basically branded herself as the bridge between the Czech culture, which was post-communist. So they were adjusting to capitalism. They had no idea how capitalism worked.
Crazy.
And these large corporations that were basically, trying to move into this new country and this new economy. So the Microsofts, the KPMGs, the phone companies, all these companies that were coming in to take advantage of this sort of brand new market. And they needed someone that could be a cultural bridge, and she was that. And she positioned herself so well for that because she had this international education, international experience, but she was Czech.
Yeah.
And she took the leap. People might have found that out about her if they talked to her, but she took the leap to say, this is who I am, and this is what I do. I am that bridge.
Yes.
And I think that's the leap that is the branding leap, right? That's the memorable thing that she put out there that she taught me. And she also taught me, she said, it's good to be a big fish in a small pond. That's advantageous. And that's also beneficial in certain types of branding as well, because you can be very consistent and sort of have an influence over that, right? You search for something pretty specific. I mean, agriculture is big, but because that search was specific, I came up in it because I'm so consistent and let's say a bigger fish in a smallish pond, right? So
what do you mean by that? Big fish in a small pond? I think I know, but I want you to tell me in your own words.
I mean, like, look, if you're an AI developer now, you're not really, you're in a pretty big pond. It's a pretty big pond.
Yeah.
But if you were early, or if that pond was smaller at the beginning, if you were a pioneer, right? It's almost about being pioneering, right? The pond will get bigger if it's successful, but that's what it's about, right? It's like, and so vertical farming was nothing when I started my blog. There was no industry, there was no investment. And so I took the risk to double down, to brand myself, and to not just be in the industry as a player, but to lead the industry, just like my mom led her industry in her niche, right? So my niche is a smaller part of a much bigger industry in agriculture, but that's the smallish pond where I've created some level of leadership through branding that has allowed me to grow as fast as the pond grows, right? Yeah. Because it's my pond to some extent, you know, that's this analogy is a little bit, this metaphor is a little bit weird, but you know what I mean? And she grew in that. My mom was contacted to be president of the country. Like she grew in this country in ways that were far beyond her industry. She's run a women's organization for mentorship that's gotten super. She's been on TV in this country because the country is relatively small. So that's also for her was choosing a small country. And so for me, I knew my market was small, but I also knew that globally it was bigger. And I knew that I had a global experience that nobody else did. I have an ability to understand other cultures due to the privilege that my parents gave me, taking me around the world. So I sort of did some combination of that. Like, what is the global context for vertical farming? What do all these cities around the world need? And how can I be a sort of shepherd to this industry that I believed was going to be inevitable in some ways because of these drivers? So I learned a lot from her.
Yeah. And I knew you were going to go, it's finding a niche, basically.
Yes.
What your point, and that doesn't mean that you have to find some brand new thing that nobody's talking about.
Yeah.
But what it does mean, for instance, in kind of my line of work, there's a lot of podcasters out there that are doing things on farming. They're talking about the grain market and what the price of corn is and what the commodity price of that is and how the tariffs, those are all fine. I love them. They're good shows. A lot of times I listen, but they're probably not going to have a guy on there that talks about vertical farming.
Yeah, not as much.
And that just is because I am trying to find a niche. I'm still trying to work on that, by the way. I'm guessing it takes some time.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
Yeah.
But surrounding myself with people like you that have understood it's all about consistency and finding that niche and then just sticking to it and driving it home. And clearly everybody that listened to this and has stuck around this long knows that you are diving. You're more than knee deep into this. You have more than the answers. I mean, this is your life. This is who you are. This is your brand.
Part of my DNA now.
Yeah, it's definitely part of your DNA.
But I want to share something else that's valuable. Like people might say, oh, obviously because of the way I grew up, I had a lot of benefits. But this hasn't been easy. And I actually want to give some tools because it wasn't about luck either.
Yeah.
You know, I got interested first in climate change as a young person because a professor inspired me when he talked about water issues. And my first interest was water. And I needed to find my niche. And I had no idea about agriculture. And I started to find the connection between agriculture and water. So I started getting a little interested. But I mostly wanted to be involved with cities. Like I love cities. I love the idea of building cities that are smarter. And I wanted to change cities to be more responsive and mostly adapt to climate change. That was sort of the main spark. But I had no idea how. But I was willing to put my voice out there to discover what my niche was. So this is what's really important. This is how the luck factor isn't relevant as much, right? I created 3 blogs, but one of them was Agritecture, and I managed all 3 blogs. So imagine if you did 3 podcasts, different niches in agriculture, and one of them you learned 6 months later was more interesting to your audience, was getting more traffic, was getting more comments, more engagement, was growing faster. And one of them was also more interesting to you. It was connecting with you in a better way.
Yeah.
Now it's like, forget the other 2.
Of course.
I found my pond, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with me, right? One was about cities and density and designing cities in different ways to be more, it was like a creative blog. One was just a pure news blog on water and technology. The water one was too crowded. There was too many blogs on that topic. The city one was too niche. It was too futuristic. People weren't getting it. It wasn't connecting with it. It was too much of like just my ideas onto paper. But the Agritecture one had an amazing name that people connected with. They got it immediately what it was about. And it was, people were searching. People were hungry for this information. There was no blog that was delivering it the way I was. So it grew as a result of that. So, anyone can find this. They can find the balance of their passion and the opportunity. But you have to be willing to experiment. And that includes experimentation with your brand in the early days before you do that part you're talking about, where you're just consistent all the time. So it's not just about finding an economic opportunity, but also finding what you really are interested in to be able to deliver that consistently. Because authenticity is one reason why people are attracted to work with me and things you mentioned, right? They know that I care about this. They know that I want success in this. It's not a job. It's part of my life, which is what you said, right? Yeah. And that's because I found that passion through that exercise.
It's inspiring, man. I'm super grateful that I was able to come across to you, and I'm glad we're going to build up a network here, hopefully, and stay in touch. And I'm excited to see where you're going to go and how you're going to build this. And when somebody cares about something as much as you do, I know success is coming. I mean, it's obvious.
That's very generous.
So,
very generous. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Henry Gordon Smith, thank you so much, man, for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Love your podcast. I'll be staying tuned for future ones and keep up the good work. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, man. Thanks so much. See you later. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning into the Germinate Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others in the industry. And join me next time as we continue to explore the innovations and strategies shaping the future of agriculture and business. Until then, keep growing, keep innovating, and keep germinating your success.